My name is Dalton, and I swear I will never use Randonautica again. What happened to my friends and me was no mere coincidence. It was like stepping into a nightmare we couldn't wake up from. If you think Randonautica is just some harmless app, a random adventure generator, you're dead wrong. We thought it was all in good fun. But what started as a curiosity ended in something darker than I could ever have imagined. It all began on a Friday night, the kind of evening where the world feels heavy with humidity, like something is about to happen. We were bored, just like every other Friday night. Me, Jake, Sierra, and Megan. You know, we were typical friends hanging out after work, talking about nothing. That's when Megan suggested using Randonautica. It was trending all over social media back then. She said, "Why don't we give it a shot? See if the app can lead us somewhere interesting." Jake was immediately into it. He was always the adventurous type, never backing down from anything that had even a whisper of excitement or danger. Sierra rolled her eyes, but eventually caved, not wanting to be left out. I, on the other hand, felt a creeping discomfort. There was something about the randomness of it all, an app guiding you to unknown places, creating intent from your thoughts, that felt unnatural. "Come on, Dalton, don't be a killjoy," Jake teased. So, I gave in. We downloaded the app and huddled together to set our first intent. The whole premise was that you think of something, an idea, a word, an emotion, and the app would direct you to a random location that supposedly aligned with your intent. It sounded like a cosmic fortune cookie, but what harm could it really do? Our first intent was something mysterious, seemed vague enough to avoid disappointment. We piled into Jake's car, Sierra in the passenger seat, Megan and me in the back, and followed the directions Randonautica provided. It led us out of the suburbs and into an area I wasn't familiar with, wooded, far from the usual places we hung out. After about 20 minutes, the road narrowed, the trees thickened, and the streetlights disappeared. The app chirped that we were close, but I was starting to feel that prickly sensation you get when you know something's off. The car headlights swept over a crumbling driveway. No house, just a desolate path. "Are we sure this is the right place?" Sierra asked, her voice tight. "It looks abandoned." But Jake was already out of the car, phone in hand, heading down the path without hesitation. I wish he hadn't. The deeper we went, the stranger it got. There were no sounds, no crickets, no birds, no wind, just the muffled thud of our shoes on the dirt and the occasional crack of a twig underfoot. The air was thick, the smell of damp earth clinging to everything. But what struck me the most was how the trees seemed to close in on us, like the forest itself was alive, watching. Then we saw it. At the end of the path was an old rusted gate, leaning awkwardly to one side as if time had forgotten it existed. Beyond it, in the dim glow of our phone flashlights, stood an ancient, crumbling building. It looked like a house, or maybe it had been once, but now it was nothing more than a skeleton of wood and rot. "Wow, talk about mysterious," Megan whispered, clearly unnerved but trying to play it cool. Jake was already pushing through the gate, and like idiots, we followed. Inside the house, or what was left of it, everything was silent. The kind of silence that gets under your skin. The floorboards groaned beneath us, and I noticed the walls were covered in peeling wallpaper, the kind with old-fashioned floral patterns, now faded and streaked with black mold. A damp chill hung in the air, making it hard to breathe. In the center of what used to be the living room was an overturned table, and lying next to it, an old, tattered book. Megan picked it up, her curiosity getting the better of her. "Guys, look at this." She handed it to me, and the moment I touched it, I felt something. A cold pulse, like static electricity but deeper, more visceral. The cover had no title, just a strange embossed symbol that I couldn't quite make out. When I opened it, the pages were filled with handwritten text, but the ink was smudged and bled, making it unreadable. "That's creepy as hell," Sierra muttered, backing away. "Come on, let's go upstairs," Jake said, already halfway up the staircase. I didn't want to follow, but none of us could stop. Something was pulling us deeper into the house, into the heart of whatever was waiting. Upstairs, there were 3 rooms. One door was ajar, and the moment we stepped into it, everything changed. The temperature plummeted, and the air felt dense, like we were being smothered. The room was bare except for an old mirror hanging crookedly on the wall. Its glass was covered in grime, but there was someone, reflected in it. At first, I thought it was just a trick of the light, but then Megan screamed. In the reflection, standing behind us was a figure, tall, dark, and barely human. Its face was obscured, but its eyes were white, glowing like burning coals. And it was moving closer, though when I turned around, nothing was there. Jake laughed nervously, trying to shake off the fear, but his voice trembled. "It's just our minds playing tricks." No one believed that. The room itself seemed to pulse, a low, rhythmic hum that grew louder, vibrating through the walls and into our bones. I felt like the house was breathing, and we were inside it, trapped. We ran, bolting down the stairs, but when we reached the front door, it wouldn't open. The handle wouldn't turn, and no matter how hard we shoved, the door wouldn't budge. Panic gripped us. I tried the windows. They were stuck too. It was like the house was sealing us in. The rhythmic hum grew louder, and then the lights on our phones flickered and died. Total darkness swallowed us. I don't know how long we stood there, trapped in that suffocating blackness, our breath coming in panicked gasps, but it felt like hours. And then, out of nowhere, we heard it. The soft creak of the floorboards above us, slow, deliberate footsteps. Someone, or something, was coming down the stairs. "No, no, no," Sierra whispered, clutching my arm. "What the hell is that?" The footsteps grew closer, slow and heavy, like whatever was up there wanted us to hear it coming. Megan was crying now, and Jake had gone silent, his face pale and tight with fear. Suddenly, the door slammed open with a deafening crack. Without thinking, we sprinted outside, not stopping until we were halfway down the overgrown driveway. But when we reached the car, the engine wouldn't start. Jake cursed under his breath, turning the key again and again, but nothing happened. Behind us, the house loomed, its windows dark and empty, but I could feel it. Something was watching us from within. Then Megan gasped, pointing to the mirror inside the car. Reflected in the rearview mirror was the same figure we'd seen in the house, tall, dark, with those burning white eyes, and it was getting closer. Looking back at the driveway, we saw a large, inky black figure slowly moving down the driveway towards us. That was the last straw. We abandoned the car and ran, cutting through the woods, not caring where we ended up, as long as we got away from that place. We didn't stop running until we were miles from the house. When we finally collapsed, out of breath, I looked around. Something had followed us, something we couldn't see but could feel. It was with us, always just out of sight. Jake refused to talk about what happened. Sierra moved away a month later, and Megan hasn't been the same since. She keeps seeing things, shadowy figures in mirrors, reflections that don't belong. As for me, I deleted Randonautica the next day, but it didn't matter. It'd been years, and ever since that night I keep seeing dark figures in the distance and darting shadows out of the corner of my eye. Whatever we found that night, it's still with us. It's still watching. Looking back, it seems absurd, using Randonautica for a first date idea. But at the time, it seemed quirky, spontaneous, like the kind of thing that could spark a connection. I had just met Chelsea a few days prior through a mutual friend, and we'd hit it off immediately. Our conversations were natural, easy, like we'd known each other for years. When I suggested doing something different for our first date, Chelsea was game for it. "Why not Randonautica?" she'd said, laughing as she opened the app. "Let's let the universe decide where we go." The idea sounded exciting, a mystery adventure dictated by our thoughts. It felt unpredictable, like a plot twist waiting to happen. If only I had known then how twisted things would become. It was a warm Saturday evening in late October, the kind where the air feels heavy and electric. We met at a little cafe near the edge of town, grabbed coffees, and sat in my car, ready to start the night. Chelsea said our intent. Something beautiful. It sounded innocent enough, and we both agreed that it felt right, romantic even. Randonautica pinged our location, and we were off. The directions led us out of town, past quiet streets, and into more remote back roads. As we drove, the excitement built. Chelsea leaned in close, her eyes sparkling with curiosity. The sky was starting to darken, the sun setting behind the trees, casting long shadows over the road. We laughed about what we might find. Maybe a hidden pond, a scenic overlook, or some forgotten garden. Our imaginations ran wild, and for a while, everything felt light, carefree. Then, the road narrowed. The app had taken us farther than I'd expected, out past where the map should have ended, into an area I didn't recognize. The trees thickened, closing in on both sides of the road. A dense fog was rolling in, covering the ground like a thin veil, and the streetlights disappeared behind us. "We're almost there," Chelsea said, checking the app. Her voice was steady, but there was something off about the way the light from her phone reflected in her eyes. Maybe it was just my imagination, but for a brief moment she looked worried. We pulled up to the destination, an old, overgrown path leading into the woods. My stomach tightened. There was nothing beautiful about it. The trees here were tall, gnarled things, their twisted branches reaching overhead like skeletal arms. The air was still, unnaturally quiet, as though the forest itself was holding its breath. "This doesn't feel right," I muttered. Chelsea shrugged. "Maybe it's just a short walk in. The app says we're close. Let's check it out." Against my better judgment, I killed the engine, grabbed a flashlight, and we started down the path. Chelsea stayed close to me, her usual confidence wavering. The flashlight beam cut through the fog, but the darkness pressed in from all sides. As we moved deeper into the woods, I could feel the temperature drop, an unnerving chill that seeped into my bones. "Do you hear that?" Chelsea whispered. I paused, listening. Nothing. But then it came. Faint at first, like the distant creak of a tree swaying in the wind. Only there was no wind. The sound grew louder, a slow, deliberate creaking, like wood being twisted until it snapped. It echoed through the trees, coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. "We should go back," I said, turning to Chelsea. But she wasn't looking at me. Her eyes were fixed ahead, wide and unblinking. I followed her gaze and saw it, a shadowy figure standing in the middle of the path, just beyond the reach of the flashlight. My heart lurched into my throat. At first I thought it was just another tree, but then it moved, slowly, like it was waiting for us to notice it. Its limbs were long, impossibly thin, and its head hung at an unnatural angle. I stumbled back, gripping Chelsea's arm. "We're leaving. Now." She didn't move. Her body was rigid, her breathing shallow. And then the figure stepped closer. I yanked Chelsea backward, and that seemed to snap her out of it. She gasped, and we bolted, sprinting back the way we came, the flashlight bouncing wildly as I ran. The path seemed longer now, twisting and turning in ways I didn't remember. Every step felt like it was taking us deeper into the forest, not out of it. My breath came in ragged gasps, and I could hear Chelsea's footsteps right behind me. But something else was there too. The creaking sound followed us, closer now, faster. We burst out of the trees and reached the car. I fumbled for the keys, my hands shaking so badly that I dropped them onto the gravel. Chelsea snatched them up and threw herself into the passenger seat, her hands trembling as she locked the doors. I turned the key in the ignition, and for a sickening moment, nothing happened. I thought we were trapped. But then, the engine roared to life, and I floored the gas pedal, speeding away from that evil place. Neither of us spoke for a long time. The only sound was the hum of the car's engine and the rush of blood in my ears. My heart was still pounding in my chest. The image of that thing seared into my mind. "What was that?" Chelsea finally whispered. I didn't have an answer. I didn't want to think about it. But as we drove back toward town, something was nagging at me. Something I couldn't shake. I glanced in the rearview mirror, and my blood ran cold. Behind us in the distance, I could see it. That same figure standing at the edge of the road, watching us. It was further away, but unmistakable. The long, twisted limbs, the tilted head. It hadn't followed us, not exactly, but it was still there, waiting. I didn't say anything to Chelsea. I didn't want to scare her more than she already was, but my mind raced. What had we stumbled into? Was it the Randonautica app? Or was it something else, something far older, darker, something that had been waiting in those woods long before we ever showed up? When we reached town, I dropped Chelsea off at her apartment. She kissed me goodbye, but there was no warmth in it. No spark of excitement like there had been earlier that evening. She was just as shaken as I was. We promised to see each other again, but there was an unspoken agreement that we wouldn't talk about what had happened. Not yet. Maybe not ever. I drove home in silence, the streets of my neighborhood dark and empty. The quiet should have been comforting, but it wasn't. I couldn't stop looking in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see that figure again. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw it. Those long, twisted limbs, that unnatural tilt of its head. And then there was the sound. That slow, deliberate creaking, like something ancient and malevolent was moving through the darkness, just outside my window. When I woke up the next morning, I had a message from Chelsea. Did you see it? My stomach dropped. I knew what she was talking about, but I didn't want to admit it. I didn't want to acknowledge that we had seen the same thing, that whatever it wasn't done with us. Another message popped up before I could respond. I think it followed me. I felt a cold sweat break out across my skin. The room seemed to close in on me, the walls too tight, the air too thin. Then came the last message. I can hear it. The sound, the creaking. I sent her a text back, then called her, but I received no response. I never heard from Chelsea again. She was reported missing a couple of days later. She just vanished. The police found her apartment was locked from the inside. No signs of a struggle, no forced entry. It was like she had simply disappeared. But I know the truth. Whatever it was we found that night, it found her, and it's still out there.